America thought they knew her. She was the smiling country girl, the barefoot beauty who loved animals, laughed easily, and seemed untouched by the harshness of the world. Week after week, millions watched her on screen and believed they were seeing the real thing. But they weren't, because long before the fame, before the lights, before anyone ever called her a star, she made a decision that would quietly shape the rest of her life. A decision that never really stopped following her. And it began in a small town where dreams didn't come easy. She was born as Doris Ione Smith on September 26, 1932, in Pride, Louisiana, a place that lived up to its name in spirit, but not in opportunity. The Great Depression had left its mark, and families like hers learned quickly how to survive on very little. Life there was simple, but not easy. Her father worked long, exhausting hours for Standard Oil, doing whatever it took to keep food on the table. The pay was never quite enough, and the work never really stopped. Her mother, who had once worked as a telephone operator, gave up her job after marriage, like many women of that time, trading independence for stability. Their home wasn't filled with luxury. It was filled with necessity. And in that environment, comfort wasn't expected, it was earned. Growing up, she didn't quite fit the mold people expected of young girls in her community. While others were taught to sit still and prepare for homemaking, she found herself drawn outside. She climbed trees, chased animals, and wandered through muddy fields catching crawfish with scraped hands and bright eyes. She wasn't trying to stand out. That was just who she was. There was something wild and free about her spirit, something that refused to be shaped by expectation, and even in a deeply religious Catholic environment where discipline and tradition were strong, that part of her never disappeared. In fact, it only grew stronger. At school, that same energy carried over. She wasn't just active, she was competitive. She played softball and basketball at a time when girls weren't always encouraged to push themselves that way. But she didn't hold back, and in 1951, she graduated as part of her school's very first graduating class. It might seem like a small detail, but it hinted at something deeper, a pattern that would follow her throughout life. She had a habit of stepping into spaces before they were fully built and finding her way anyway, but life didn't give her much time to figure things out slowly. At just 17 years old, she got married. It felt like a step forward at the time, like adulthood arriving early. But that step quickly turned into something heavier than she expected. Marriage brought responsibility, expectations, pressure, and in a conservative environment, those expectations weren't flexible. They didn't leave room for uncertainty or dreams that stretched beyond the life already mapped out for her. For a while, it must have felt like her future had already been decided. Then came motherhood. In 1954, just days before her 22nd birthday, she gave birth to her son. It should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. And in many ways, it was, but it also brought a new kind of weight. Because love doesn't erase struggle, it often makes it heavier. She was young. She had limited resources, and her marriage was already beginning to fall apart. That same year, she made another life-altering decision. She got divorced. In that time and place, divorce wasn't just difficult, it was something that followed you. It carried judgment, whispers, doors closing quietly behind your back. And she was only 21 years old with a newborn child. No clear path, no safety net, just a choice between staying in a life that felt suffocating or stepping into the unknown. She chose the unknown. For a while, survival became the focus. She worked what jobs she could. She leaned on family. She kept moving forward, even when forward didn't feel like progress. Then, something unexpected happened. She entered beauty pageants, not for glamour, not for attention, but for opportunity. At 24, she won the Miss Baton Rouge title. Suddenly, people looked at her differently. She wasn't just a struggling, single mother anymore. She was someone with presence, someone who could stand on a stage and be noticed, and that changed everything. Because sometimes all it takes is one shift in how the world sees you for you to start seeing yourself differently too. She didn't stop there. She went on to win Miss New Orleans. And with those back-to-back victories, something inside her began to solidify. A possibility. A belief that her life could be bigger than survival. But belief alone wasn't enough. If she wanted something more, she would have to take a risk. A real one. And that's when she made the decision that would stay with her forever. She left her young son behind with her parents in Louisiana and boarded a bus to New York City. It wasn't abandonment. It wasn't carelessness. It was something far more painful than that. It was a mother choosing distance now in the hope of creating a better future later. But hope doesn't make separation easier. And no matter how much she tried to justify it, that choice came with a cost. One she carried quietly. New York didn't welcome her with open arms. It tested her. Hard. The city didn't care about pageant titles from Louisiana. It didn't care about her story, her sacrifices, or her determination. It only cared about what you could prove. And, at first, she couldn't prove much. She lived in cheap boarding houses where the nights felt longer than the days. She walked into agencies only to be told she needed professional photos she couldn't afford. Rejection became routine. Hope would rise in the morning and fall apart by evening. Money was always tight. Sometimes she ate just one meal a day. Sometimes even that felt like a luxury. And still, she sent what little she could back home. Because, even from miles away, she was still a mother first. The work she found wasn't glamorous. Standing outside in cold weather as a billboard model. Smiling through numb fingers. Pretending everything was fine. Auditions weren't much better. Some were degrading. Others were simply cruel. But she kept showing up. Because going back home, defeated, wasn't an option she was ready to accept. Then came a moment that could have broken her. At an audition, a producer made it clear that getting the job would require something more than talent. Something personal. Something she wasn't willing to give. She needed the work. Desperately. But she walked away. In tears. Shaken. But firm. And somehow she still got the job. In a world that often rewards compromise, that moment became something rare. Proof that holding your ground doesn't always mean losing everything. Sometimes it means keeping what matters most. Slowly, things began to shift. Small roles turned into steady work. She appeared on television shows, gaining visibility. Her face became familiar. And in that industry, familiarity is power. Then came a turning point. An appearance that caught the attention of someone who could change her career. And just like that, she was no longer invisible. But success didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, and each piece required patience. Until one day, she found herself auditioning for a role that would define her life. The competition was intense. Hundreds of women wanted the part. She had barely any acting experience. On paper, she shouldn't have stood a chance. Then the audition took an unexpected turn. She was asked to milk a goat. For many, it would have been embarrassing, awkward, maybe even impossible. But for her, it was familiar, natural. She had done it before. In that moment, she didn't have to act. She just had to be herself. And that made all the difference. She got the role. And when the show premiered, everything changed. Almost overnight, she became a household name. The show was a massive success, drawing millions of viewers. People loved her character. They saw innocence, warmth, and charm. And they believed it was all effortless. But behind the scenes, things weren't always so simple. Fame brought attention, but it also brought expectations and labels. She became something she never fully intended to be, a symbol, a fantasy. A version of herself that the world wanted to hold onto. But she never forgot who she really was, or what she stood for. While others chased bigger roles, more attention, more money, she made different choices. She turned down opportunities that didn't align with her values. She protected her integrity even when it meant closing doors. And those doors did close. After the show ended, Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with her. She was too strongly associated with one role. Too defined. Too recognizable. It's a strange thing. Success can sometimes limit you as much as it elevates you. She wanted more serious roles. More depth. But the industry kept offering the same image, the same character, over and over again. So she made another unexpected decision. She stepped away, not completely, but intentionally. She turned towards something that had always been part of her life: faith. She began singing gospel music, speaking at churches, sharing her story, not as a celebrity, but as someone who had lived through struggle, doubt, and difficult choices. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about purpose. She wrote books for children, stories that carried gentle lessons, messages about kindness, identity, and belief. And in that quieter life, she found something that fame never fully gave her: peace. Years later, when she faced legal battles over her likeness being used without permission, she stood firm again. Not for attention, but for principle. Even in her later years, she didn't lose that strength, that quiet determination. Eventually, she returned home, back to Louisiana, back to where it all began. She lived simply, spent time with family, answered fan letters, spoke to young people about staying true to themselves, and through it all, one part of her life remained deeply personal: her son, the boy she left behind, the choice that started everything. She never stopped being his mother, even from a distance, even through the years. And when her life came to an end in 2015, it wasn't in the spotlight. It was quiet, peaceful, surrounded by family. Looking back, her story isn't just about fame. It's not just about success. It's about choices, difficult ones, the kind that don't come with clear answers. It's about holding onto your values when the world offers you shortcuts, about walking away when something feels wrong, about believing that who you are matters more than what you can gain. Because in the end, she wasn't just the character people saw on screen. She was something far more complex, more human, more real. A woman who chose faith over fame, principle over comfort, and purpose over applause.